All right, so we're going to continue our study on functions and operations with functions. So today's lesson is on inverse functions. Now, inverse functions, in a very simplistic definition, inverse functions simply undo each other. So you'll have a function and typically it will have an inverse. Not all of them have an inverse, but most of them do. And the inverse undoes the parent function or the original function. So it sounds sort of complicated and maybe a little intimidating, but the actual process of finding inverse functions is rather simple. So take good notes, and I think you'll actually like this one just a little bit. So we're going to start with a function, and let's say we have y equals 3x plus 1. All right, so this is a linear function. Now, in order to find the inverse of a function, your first step is to switch the x and the y. So, literally, you're going to move the x over here and move the y over here. So you're going to rewrite it, and it's really going to be x equals 3y plus 1. Okay, so that's the first step. So now what we want to do is solve for y. We want to get y by itself. All right, so follow the process of solving an equation. We're going to subtract 1 from both sides. So we get x minus 1 equals 3y. And we're still trying to get y by itself, so we're going to divide both sides by 3. And this right here is the inverse of your original equation. You're done. That's it. You're done. You don't have to rewrite it. You can leave it as a fraction. Bam. Isn't that cool? All right, so let's try another one. I know y'all are probably sitting there going, no, Miss Fowler, that is so not cool. But you know what? In math world, that is cool. All right, so let's do this one. Okay, so again, the first step is to do what? Okay, hopefully you said switch your x and your y. All right, and then the next thing you have to do is to, good, hopefully you said subtract 4 from both sides. And then you divide by -3. And you're done. Now tell me, isn't that great? Okay, so let's do some that aren't linear, because you may need to have your brains refreshed with how to do these types. So let's say we have one that looks like this. All right, so you'll notice there's an exponent in here, okay? No big deal. Same process. So first step, switch your x and your y. Okay. Next step, subtract 5 from both sides. Okay. Since we're solving equations, the next thing we do, we ignore this exponent for now, divide by -2. All right, now, what you may not remember, or maybe, I don't know, what is the opposite? What undoes squaring something? What's the opposite of squaring something? Hopefully, you thought or said taking the square root. So we're going to take the square root, okay, because the square root of y squared leaves you with just y, which is what we're aiming for here. And what you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So you're just going to take the square root of everything over here. So your solution is simply the square root of x minus 5 over negative 2, which equals y. And you've just found the inverse. Okay? So don't let that square or the square root stuff, don't let that intimidate you. Just remember that square rooting something, that may not be proper English, but it'll be all right. I'll be forgiven. The square root of squaring something just undoes each other. That's the cool thing about inverses. You're just undoing what's been done. Okay. Let's look at one where the square, you got to do that first. So let's look at this one. All right, so in this case, the square is on the outside of the parentheses, so we're actually going to have to undo the square first. And this, if we look back at this problem, there were no parentheses, and the x, it was the last thing we did, okay, because it was just kind of out here. It's only with the x. In this case, the square is with the whole problem over here, so you're going to have to actually undo that first. But first, before we undo anything, again, hopefully you remembered, you've got to switch your x and your y. All right, so now we can kind of dive in and start undoing things. So again, if everything's being squared, you've got to undo that by taking the square root. And what you do to one side, you got to do to the other. So we took the square root of both sides, so I have the square root of x equals, well remember, it undoes each other. When you take the square root of a squared value, it undoes each other. So you're left with y minus 1 on this side. And now we're still trying to get y by itself. Opposite of subtracting 1 is to add 1. Now be careful here. The only thing that's being square rooted is the x. So when you add this 1, it simply gets tagged on to the outside. Okay? So you're left with the square root of x plus 1 equals y. Alright, so re-watch parts of this video that maybe correlates with the practice problems that you're doing in class. The practice problems that I give you will follow along in the same patterns of the examples that I've given you in this video. So use this video as a tool to help you solve those problems. I think you'll do a great job with this, and I hope you have a great afternoon and rest of your day, and I'll see you Friday.